Many thanks to the organizers of this meeting for conceiving of this intriguing area of inquiry in animal studies. Today I discuss the human-horse relationships of the European Bronze Age, which began at the turn of the second millennium BC, that I contextualize by many millennia of shifting borderlands in human-horse relationships. Alloys of tin and copper join like bodies of horses and riders, with a hybrid vigor enabling the travels, transmissions, and transformations that Christiansen and Larson envisioned for the European Bronze Age. Equestrians and bronze are the alloyed scions of new worlds unfurling in the second millennium BC. This integration of bodies, behaviors, sociality, and experience resulted in a new way of being, transforming both species as it unfolded. Equestrianism afforded new ways of life, increased interconnectivity, and ways to resist, consent to, or assert political power. To explore the equestrian borderlands of the Bronze Age requires a deeper context in how this improbable hybrid beast came to be. The human-horse relationship obviously traverses a multitude of familiar binary borders, such as human-animal, wild-domestic, earth-sky, etc. While these borderlands are fertile grounds for inquiry, in this paper, I take a deep-time, coevolutionary perspective of the relationship between people and horses, which pushes human cognitive and physical borders in an increasing refinement of interspecies attunement. This relationship has absolutely ancient roots, seemingly shaping transformations in human behavior and evolution. We became human with horses before we became equestrian. The human-horse relationship itself is a borderland, with shifting negotiations at multiple levels. Mediated by material culture and shaped by environmental and social contexts, this relationship is set in a larger web of entanglements. Post-humanist ontological perspectives have led us to the conclusion that ultimately the power to alter webs of relationships derives not from people or even from other organisms, places, things, but from the relations themselves. In Becoming Human and Becoming Equestrian, as Deleuze and Guattari write, the becoming produces nothing other than itself. Becoming is about a new state of being in the world where hybridity generates novel possibilities. In the simplest terms, the horse-human relationship resides at the frontiers of how people move and think, ultimately spurring how we experience the world and organize ourselves within it and with it. Game contends, quote, "We are always already part horse and horses part human. There is no such thing as pure horse or pure human. The human body is not simply human. Through interconnectedness, through our participation in the life of the world, humans are always forever mixed, and thus too have what could be described as a capacity for horseness." The human-horse relationship dramatically changed the perception of time, space, and the landscape in ancient Eurasia. Accepting the premise, the basic structure of the perception of the world is transformed as these relationships evolve. The physical world around us shapes our habitus and imbues us with unwritten social rules and ways of speaking and moving. When the human-horse relationship changes, so do persons and horses, because the relations transform them and they come to perceive reality, shared environments, and bodies in different ways. I contend here that horses have reciprocally shaped how we became human because they were a key species to us in becoming human. Horses featured prominently in how ancient hominins behaved, our ancient ancestors and cousins basically, and have resided in our consciousness as species evolved, guiding the ways in which we became human. While modern humans were still evolving in Africa, in these images we have evidence of other ancient hominins, our cousins, either Homo heidelbergensis or Neanderthalensis, hunting, butchering, and consuming horses at a site in Schrödingen, Germany. The excavations have important implications for debates that continue today about human cognitive evolution, cooperative behavior, resource sharing, planning depth, and the evolution of language. In following, observing, and hunting horses, these hominins had command of effective language skills about the here and now, the past and future, and about distant spatial relationships that allowed them to repeatedly execute well-coordinated and successful group activities similar to the people living today. Shipman contends that the human-animal connection is the underlying link among other key human behaviors in that it substantially influenced human evolution. In our case, horses were there from very early on, before we became human. And in becoming a proficient hunter and communicating information about hunting and food sharing, our linkages with horses and as hunter and prey pushed the metamorphosis of Homo sapiens. At another frontier of human evolution, some 250,000 years later, these images show Homo sapiens sapiens, otherwise known as behaviorally modern humans, appearing in Europe around 40,000 years ago, continuing to follow, consume, and hunt horses on a rather massive scale. But moving beyond the obviously profane into the first widespread expressions of human art, the Upper Paleolithic cave art that's so famous in Europe dates back as far as 33,000 BC. Here, Sauvé found that people painted horses more often and in more prominent locations than any other species. They also developed a formality in terms of expressing horses that increased through time and became more rigid. People portrayed horses as they actually looked in real life. Now that ancient DNA can provide us with accurate coat colors from this time. Hunting horses, people became acutely attuned to their behaviors, following them throughout Eurasia and into the Americas. Horse-laden cave and portable art corresponds with an explosion in human symbolic behavior, art, music, technology, and travel. In describing the cave art at Chauvet, the filmmaker Werner Herzog claims, "It is as if the modern human soul awakened here." Borders were redrawn with greater porosity as horses were increasingly drawn into human communities, where people devoted their entire subsistence and social practices almost exclusively to horses. This dependency of humans on horse herds was an intensification process of complex, long-standing mutual adaptations developed as hunter and prey. By 3500 BC, at the site of Botai in Kazakhstan, people apparently husbanded, milked mares, and probably rode domesticated horses to hunt other horses. Here we see reconstructions of the village of Botai, and then where from organic mouthpieces on a 10-year-old stallion's teeth in the front of the tooth, otherwise known as bit wear. And here you have a possible bridle style with this organic mouthpiece. And here we have reconstructions of the houses and corrals that are known from archaeological excavations at this settlement. However, we know that these were not the ancestors of modern domesticated horses. There is a number of experiments apparently throughout this process. And now, if you remember, all the other domesticated large species have been domesticated by now: cows, pigs, sheep, goats. Horses were the last of the 5 major species. These horses at Botai were ancestors of Przewalski's horses, which you can see in zoos and now again in Mongolia, which subsequently became feral after these domestication experiments. The smaller red circle highlights the earliest known specimen on the ancestral line to domesticated horses, which we will see in a minute, and it comes from Middle Bronze Age of Hungary. With increasingly close association to horses presumed, a massive shift in culture, genetics, and language are thought to have been made possible by the adoption of domesticated horses by Yamnaya peoples, enabling these massive migrations west between 3300 to 2500 BC, just prior to the onset of the Bronze Age. While we do not yet know much about the Yamnaya horses, fast developing ancient DNA research is rewriting the place and timing of this. With increasingly only present in small numbers in the Copper Age or Chalcolithic, horses appear in large numbers in Hungary in the early Bronze Age at settlements around the Danube Bin in Bell-Beaker settlements, people known as Bell-Beakers, and in the contemporaneous communities. The current earliest known horse ancestral to all modern horses has been located in Hungary at the settlement of Nyírbáros, Kossuth-Padlás, dating to the transition from the early Bronze Age to the Middle Bronze Age, 2139 to 1981, calibrated BC. As horses spread out, tell settlements are being formed throughout this region, multi-layered settlements where people engaged in crop and mostly animal husbandry, augmented by crops, had fine pottery, nice plastered houses, and buried their dead in very ordered cemeteries. The black stallion buried at Dunivarish Koslidopodlash was buried at a time which marked shift in human socio-political organization for this region, the emergence of complex tell societies, which have been thought to demonstrate rising social inequalities. This is also a period of increasing interconnectivity, thought to be the first area of globalization. So becoming equestrian became increasingly important to new ways of life. Though the timing of the earliest writing has been hotly contested, I have recently documented the earliest known writers dating to 2020 to 1730 calibrated DC from a nearby settlement in Hungary. The presence of fully domesticated horses, likely riders, new riding bits, and broad changes in horse demography are now all documented in the early centuries of this period, corresponding to the foundation of these tell societies. Chariotry is also going on farther east on the Russian steppes, almost exactly at the same time, with writing also recently corroborated there from a colleague of mine. Thus, the borderlands of writing can be viewed as emerging from millennia of increasingly intimate associations between humans and animals, refining attunements to each other's bodies, behaviors, and sociality made possible by the twinning of two species in a decidedly singular commingling. The body and intercorporeal communication are central to the ways in which horses and riders experience their own lives and one another, as Thompson writes. Each participant's bodies are interactive but bordered, with the greatest space for negotiation occurring in the minds of each, conscious or unconscious. Following Gamble and Giddens in describing social life from any archaeological period, Argent notes that equestrianism is embodied, routinized, material, and mutual, where interactions between horses, bits, and people create and modify it, resulting in a hybrid where analytical distinctions between thing, person, animal, human, and nature culture are no longer supported because of the social relationship contained in the notion of the hybrid. Riding a horse instead of walking is not merely an incidental aspect that reflects aesthetic or technical changes alone. They actively and profoundly influence the construction of identities. In the Bronze Age, the equestrian involves constructions of these new identities vastly different from the idealized elite male chariot warrior that had been thought to occur in this period. Real human advantages from equestrianism include increased and differential mobility, access, and experience. These transform human societies dynamically and broadly. Here we see a concordant map of the new types of bits associated with riding that are found at the same time. This is a local tradition developed within the Carpathian Basin at these tell settlements, and chariot bits are not present. Negotiations are embodied in equestrian meeting points on the bodies of both species, mediated with material culture. The bits, saddles, bridles. Precisely at these points of bodily contact are the impacts of such negotiations, visible in flesh and, for me, importantly, in bone, bit to teeth and mandible, to rein to hands, to shoulders and spine, pelvis to stirrup, when that happens, ribs to legs, feet to barrel. In these images, we see a possible reconstructive of a Bronze Age bridle on the left and bit wear identified from two specimens from the Middle Bronze Age of Hungary. Bodies are also mediated borders, the place of border dialogues, and as such show the impacts of these negotiations. Because neither species evolved for equestrianism, the impacts of these routinized activities mark both bodies of human and horse, manifesting in bony pathologies that we can see. Here are some of the earliest postcranial pathologies of horses that I found from a settlement at an archaeological site in Budapest. Both injuries would have caused significant lameness, but the fracture did heal and the horse was used afterwards. Use while alive was, or perhaps personal attachment, outstripped the desire to cull this individual for its carcass products. Writing always starts with a minimum of two bodies, with relatively distinct corporeal borders that are impacted and indented with shared sweat, dirt, and hair. While the meeting is embodied, the seemingly actual place of the meeting is beyond it, a feeling that exists in what is now and what may come next, always predicated on what came before. The physical bodies have limits in how much their borders flex and reciprocate, but the feel is beyond this, somewhere else. Some describe it as a transcendence, a synchrony, but it's far earthlier than that because it is grounded in time and space and flesh. In humans, habitual riding stretches the hip sockets. No other known activity causes causes this, and I use this to identify probable riders in the Hungarian Bronze Age, the earliest in history, including 2 middle-aged women and a young man. I push back at centurion ideals because no matter how much rider and horse synchronize, transcend, and forget one another in co-joint activity, bodies actually do have borders. And these borders are important because in this gap between species, ideals, visions, and expanding horizons lie. Thus, becoming equestrian leads to the ideas of new borders and borderlands. This place in the cognitive space leads to the expansion of physical geographies as cognitive geographies push them forward, expanding as time and distance compress, new possibilities unfold. And this leads to the quicker identification of borders and borderlands in a physical world. The equestrian becomes tied to border making, border taking, and border defending, leading the equestrian into the liminal land of border negotiation. In these images, we see recreations of the first mounted warriors documented in history from about 1250 BC from Tollens, Germany. Equestrianism has particular ramifications for political authority, which became new frontiers that people and horses pushed together. Dynamics inherent in this human-horse relationship, namely the superhuman power attained by becoming equestrian, imbues the individual with power. This may be leveraged into power over other people, or it may prevent others from gaining absolute power. This new way of being generated different possibilities in the way people live, relate to one another, and negotiated power and emergent trajectory. This coevolutionary arc gave each species advantages in co-joint action. Political authority became more equestrian through time. Once the equestrian leapt forth from Pandora's box, political and terrestrial boundaries became ever signaled by the centaur. Since about 1000 BC, coordinated mounted warfare and cavalry became the signs of political authority and elite power. But how people could use the equestrian advantages to negotiate power should not harness the horse scenarios only of dominance. The centaur, with suprahuman agency, increases the capacity for autonomy and resistance. But a single horse can make a single person superhuman. People imbued with horsepower have the power to resist, consent to, or assert rule. Equestrian resistance is a central tenet of the human-horse relationships through time. Social contracts between people and horses mirror collective behaviors between equestrians. In human and horse relationships, asymmetrical power is possible as individuals join bodies. So too is the potential for symmetrical and collaborative decision-making. Some people need horses to rule, and others resist rule with horses. Horses, in turn, gain power from this relationship with exceptional genetic success and a unique position in human societies. We make each other irrecoverably different in the process of becoming human and then becoming equestrian. Thank you.